So last week, we were doing this lab system setup. So on the GitHub site, we were doing the lab system setup to finish our class. We set up a Ubuntu machine. We installed and configured some software to assist us with script writing. We set up our GitHub account to give us a place that we can put our files that protects them and gives us backup copies and so on. We created a script to get some experience with using the tool to help us, to see how it shows us errors, and to see how to send things back and forth to the GitHub account to make sure everything is lined up. And then we actually made the script run without talking too much about what we did to make it run. We're going to do more of that today. We'll cover off all of that. But we finished off there. There was a section at the end of the lab for PowerShell that I'll just talk about briefly here for a minute. And just before that, I will point out that after we sent our updated file to GitHub, and then we updated it on the GitHub site and pulled it back down to our machine, we then made another change to the file. We changed the permissions on that file. We did not change the content, but since we changed something about the file, some of you may have noticed that when we did that permissions change, that our Atom window says we have unstaged changes. And the really observant people will have noticed that the file is highlighted in yellow now, not in green. So when it's highlighted in green, that means that this is either a new file or the content of the file has changed from what's on GitHub. When it's yellow, it means something else about the file has changed and is not the same as GitHub. In our case, it was a permissions change. So to have this file completely up to date on the GitHub, I would probably want to stage the file, put in a message describing what the change was. We made the file executable. I would want to commit that, and I would want to push that to GitHub with the push button, and it should send it. Now, I got an error message here. Some of you will see this, some of you will not. You might see it this week, you might see it another week. It says unable to access, could not resolve host. Now, whether it's Atom or whether it's apt to install software or other commands you may run, this is an error that you will from time to time see when you're using VMware. This is not a Ubuntu specific issue. This is a VMware thing. My virtual machine, very much likely to be the same with yours, was suspended at the end of our last class, not shut down. So it was basically hibernated, put to sleep. Before today's class, I woke it back up again, so it resumed. The problem is the virtual machine had a network state associated with it. And that network state was not properly restored by VMware when it resumed the virtual machine. As a result, my virtual machine actually doesn't have a network. It's not connected to the internet. And that's, of course, why it can't access GitHub or anything else. So that does need to be resolved. Depending on how you're running your VM and what software you have going in it, there are different things that you can attempt to try to resolve it. One of the things you can do is sudo network manager command line interface. Turn it off. I never remember NMCLI's options. The good news is I can do man NMCLI to look it up. And I can see in there that I can do NMCLI as the command. There are some options I can give, and then I have to specify whether I want help, general, networking, etc. I'm going to do it for a particular device, and the command I'm going to give is to turn off the networking. And then I'm going to turn it back on again, because sometimes that makes the VMware wake up and tell it, oh, your interface is actually here and it's okay. So sudo and mcli, ENS33 should be my network interface name. And it's not knowing that one, so let's just turn all the networking off and back on again. So it's off. Now I will turn it on. And I could do a quick IP address check to see if I have an address. And I will see that ENS33 has an IP address, which means it should now be talking to the network. The observant people will have noticed there's now also a network icon here on the VMware software that was missing before. So we managed to shake it awake. That doesn't always work. If turning the networking off and back on doesn't work, doesn't kind of wake up VMware, the only thing you can do is sudo reboot. Because every time the machine boots, it forces VMware to reset the virtual machine, which solves the network problem. So we should now be able to push our changes to GitHub. The push has finished. This error message is old. I'll press X to get rid of it. It won't go away on its own. And if I go to the GitHub website and get it to reload the page to show me the files, it'll show hello world, and the last change made was the one I just submitted, like it says 5 minutes ago, made the file executable. So hopefully that was a quick reminder of how to get things to GitHub, and also a way of dealing with our VMware issue. It will bite you throughout the semester. It will happen. Unless you're in the habit of always shutting your VM down completely, it will happen to you that your networking will be lost at some point when you resume the virtual machine. All right, so the other thing that was in that lab was, as I say, some PowerShell. Now, PowerShell by default is not included in, well, in any Linux distribution that I'm familiar with. We can install it very easily. PowerShell is distributed as a snap. I've given you the command here to go ahead and install that snap. It's snap install. The package name is PowerShell. We need the --classic option to it to make it install. And of course, we need sudo. So if I were to do that on here, to install the PowerShell snap, that will give me a PowerShell program in Linux. This is PowerShell Core that it's installing, not the older Windows one. So it doesn't have all the features and functionality we'd like to have. Microsoft is, in theory, working on this diligently. For our course, we will require the Windows 10 PowerShell. Okay. The only reason to install this on our Linux machine is if you would like to play with it a little bit during the semester, and or to see what happens when you start doing PowerShell, to see the differences between Core and the original Windows PowerShell. That should be installed by now. When I go back to it, it will give us the PowerShell command available, which is just pwsh, run from any terminal window. So if we were to say pwsh, we now have a PowerShell running. You notice its prompt looks different from bash. It's very easy to know which one you're running in by its prompt. It does work differently. Do not try to run your bash commands in the PowerShell shell. They're not the same commands. They don't work the same way. We'll talk more about PowerShell when we get to PowerShell. If you have started PowerShell up and you want to be out of it, you use the command exit to get out of it. There's nothing to submit on Blackboard for the lab system setup that we have just finished.